This is Sky News Breakfast. These are our top stories this morning. All remaining COVID restrictions in England are to be dropped this week as the Prime Minister prepares to announce his plan to live with the virus. The legal duty to self-isolate is to end, but Labour criticises the move and asks to see the evidence behind the decision. Joe Biden is to convene a National Security Council meeting today as tensions continue on the Ukrainian border, with Liz Truss warning Putin won't stop with Ukraine. Team GB strike gold at the Winter Olympics, the women's curling team taking the title in Beijing. Plus, unpicking the sharp rise in poor mental well-being in farmers as new figures suggest younger workers are more at risk. The clear-up from Storm Eunice continues, with public transport disrupted around the country and thousands still without power. The weather today: wind and heavy rain will spread southeastwards, with yellow warnings in place for much of the country. And at 2:45, we'll take a look through the morning's papers with the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, and the journalist and broadcaster, Padisha. Good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. The legal duty to self-isolate in England after testing positive for the coronavirus will end this week, with Boris Johnson set to announce his Living with COVID plan. The Prime Minister will lay out his plan to end all COVID restrictions in England to MPs when they return to Parliament. But Labour have criticised the move, asking Downing Street to publish the evidence behind the decision. Sky's Ivor Bennett reports.
For 2 years, COVID restrictions have been part of our lives, affecting almost every aspect. But by the end of next week in England, it's expected they will all be scrapped, including the need to self-isolate after a positive test as part of a plan for living with COVID. In a statement, the Prime Minister said, "We need to learn to live with this virus and continue to protect ourselves without restricting our freedoms. Thanks to our successful vaccination programme and the sheer magnitude of people who have come forward to be jabbed, we are now in a position to set out our plan for living with COVID this week." Vaccines, the government says, will be the main defence, with virus surveillance scaled back and local authorities charged with managing outbreaks. This scientist is among those who thinks it's too soon to remove self-isolation.
I'd have thought that we should have kept that in place really for the next few months, whilst we're going through relatively high levels of infection within the country, while we are not exactly sure when new variants are going to be popping up. So I have to say, I'm really nervous about it.
And he's not alone. Alison Pearson and her daughter Isabel are among the 3.7 million considered clinically extremely vulnerable. They'll be offered treatments, but still don't feel safe.
It feels very much like we're on our own this time, and there are many millions of us who are just having to walk this tightrope of trying to navigate every single situation and work out what the risk is.
For the hospitality sector, though, the risk also brings reward. This restaurant in London is predicting a 30% boost to business.
We have missed a lot of guests. They couldn't come because they had to isolate themselves for, 10 days, whatever it is. But now, we are very happy.
While the government's plan looks forward, many can't help but look back. Sharon Houghton's great-aunt Nancy is among the 160,000 COVID victims memorialised on the embankment opposite Parliament.
It's when you're putting somebody like our Nan at risk. I think it's, not right, personally.
Returning to life before the pandemic simply isn't possible, not just for those who have lost loved ones, but for all of us. COVID will forever be part of our lives. The question is, how big a part? From next week, that will depend on us as individuals. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
Let's bring in our correspondent Milena Veselinovic, who's in the newsroom for us this morning. Good morning, Milena. It's quite a moment, isn't it? And it's already being met with mixed reaction.
Morning, Kimberly. Big moment where England will shift to relying solely on vaccines and medical treatments to keep people safe, and local authorities will be required to treat a COVID outbreak as they would any other infectious disease outbreak. Now, the PM spokesman was previously asked if that means that people should go to work with COVID, and the answer was that that wasn't something that they would recommend. So you get the sense that Boris Johnson would like people to start treating COVID like the flu. So you might not go into work if you're feeling really bad, or you might be a bit more careful around people who are elderly. But the difference with COVID is, of course, that sometimes people don't have any symptoms. And we've also heard rumours that the free lateral flow tests might stop, although that hasn't been confirmed as of yet. And that's being criticised if it does go ahead, because if people don't know that they're sick, then how can they take precautions? And also, if you have to pay for it, that will deepen health inequalities. Now, we haven't heard anything on these new rules by Boris Johnson from either Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, or Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Officer. However, three-quarters of NHS leaders said in a survey that they didn't agree with the scrapping of self-isolation, according to the NHS Confederation. But for those businesses, of course, who have suffered so long with either COVID staff absences or not being able to plan because of shifting regulation, this is welcome news.
OK, Milena, thank you so much. Well, let's look at the latest COVID-19 figures as the PM prepares to do away with all those restrictions. Another 34,377 cases have been recorded in the last 24 hours, and another 128 people have died. That takes the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 160,507. Well, in response to the government's proposals, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has said that Boris Johnson is declaring victory before the war is over. You can hear more of what he has to say. He's going to join Trevor Phillips at 8:30 this morning. Now, the US President Joe Biden will convene a National Security Council meeting today to discuss the rising tension between Russia and Ukraine. It comes as the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, warns President Putin will not stop at Ukraine, but is looking to rebuild the Soviet Union. Sky's John Sparks reports now from eastern Poland, where NATO is bolstering its forces near the border with Ukraine.
It is an unsettling sight, an astonishing scene in a place that knows the perils of war. US troops with guns and gear on the ground in eastern Poland. 3,000 troops will make camp here in a community called Yashonka, although the soldiers have given it a new name. It's J-Town now, with the local arena serving as their barracks. This deployment is symbolic. It's a signal of strength as the Russian military threatens Ukraine. But it's difficult to know what Vladimir Putin will do as NATO builds up its forces.
This sleepy regional airport has begun to resemble a sophisticated military encampment, and that constitutes a clear rejection of one of Moscow's key demands, that NATO pull its forces out of Eastern Europe. And it could exacerbate tensions with the Russians even further.
For the Poles, this is proof of a new age of conflict, a contest that will require Europe to rearm. But there is gratitude here for NATO's support.
Actually, I think it's the first time in history that Anglo-Saxon troops have come to Poland, potentially to defend us against a foreign aggressor. So big day. It's a clear signal to Mr. Putin and his generals that this is where NATO territory starts and it will be defended.
And on a quick visit to the capital, the US Defense Secretary restated his support, announcing the sale of tanks and planes to the Poles.
You know, it's ironic that what Mr. Putin did not want to see happen was a stronger NATO on his flank. And that's exactly what he will see going forward.
2 million Ukrainians have made Poland their home, working or studying at universities. But these students in Rzeszów are finding it difficult to concentrate.
I have family there. I also have a father in the military. I am trying to filter the information, so I'm trying not to panic like as most people do.
And there is a question every Ukrainian in Poland asks. What do they do if Russia invades?
Personally, I would take my mom from Ukraine. I know that there are actually movements that say that they want to stay in Ukraine whatever would happen, but I will take my mom for sure to Poland.
But this was upsetting for Yarina. She feels they have a duty to return. Is it
Very bad. I'm so sorry. I didn't plan that. To be honest, like my first thought when I realized that something like this can be happen it was like, I will go back home. Like, I don't know why. Like people are escaping. I want to go back. I don't know why. Like I know why, because I love my country. But
the invasion of Ukraine seems unthinkable to some, but the Poles have begun to prepare. Refugees will be welcomed, and the military stands ready to defend. John Sparks, Sky News in Rzeszów.
Let's bring in our defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who's in Kiev for us this morning. Interesting day yesterday, Deborah, at that Munich conference. Where do we stand today?
Well, it's getting to that period where you've had these warnings from the US, from the UK, from NATO, repeated warnings, increasingly stark as well in terms of their belief that President Vladimir Putin is going to invade, has decided to invade, and that invasion will happen, according to the US president, this week. He also said that he believes, according to US intelligence, that this city, Kiev, will be one of the targets. But in terms of the actual timing, one of the key dates that has been on people's minds is today, the 20th of February. And that's because it's the day that the Beijing Olympics finish. And there had been talk from senior US officials earlier on in this crisis, speculating that President Putin wouldn't want to launch an invasion of Ukraine when his key ally, President Xi Jinping, was hosting such a big global event as the Winter Olympics. Well, that excuse or that reason for restraint ends today. And another factor is that today is the day when these huge and highly unusual military exercises by Russia in Belarus are due to finish. And the force in Belarus is the force that has caused probably the most concern amongst Western officials who have been looking at the laydown of troops around the country, because that is the force that would be used would President Putin choose to attack the capital. So any sign of those troops moving back would be seen, I imagine, as a sign of relief. But if they don't, then it really means that he has the ability to launch an invasion should he do so. So that's basically where we are in terms of the actual military side of things from the Russia perspective. But in the East, there have been, again, incredibly worrying signs that Western officials, again, have said would happen ahead of an invasion. What are they? Well, we've had an increase of shelling from the Russia-backed separatist side of territory towards Ukrainian-controlled areas. We've also had this spike in disinformation, so fake news being amplified by Russian media outlets, according to Western officials. I reported yesterday that Western officials believe that the actual volume of that disinformation being spread in Russian media has doubled in the last week. And we've also had cyber attacks. There were cyber attacks against websites last week in Ukraine. The Ukrainians say the biggest denial of service attacks in history. So all key indicators that would point to potential escalation. But as yet, things are pretty calm.
OK, Deborah, thank you. And we will be getting more on that story this morning with the Europe Minister, James Cleverly. That's on Trevor Phillips on Sunday, 8:30 this morning. Now, travellers are continuing to face disruption across the UK in the wake of Storm Eunice, and the clear-up effort is set to be hampered with more wet and windy weather forecast for today. I'm joined now by the Director of Network Rail, Jake Kelly. Mr. Kelly, it's good to speak to you again. Thanks for joining us. So where are we today in terms of if you're travelling, what should you do?
Well, our engineers have been working again overnight to fix things up, put wires back, fix up stations, cut down even more trees. And we do expect almost all of the network to open as planned this morning, but inevitably with the forecasts today, there will be more disruption and our strong advice to customers is to check before they travel, and that applies particularly to the northwest of England, South Wales and the southwest.
Last time we spoke, you were telling people on Friday, just don't travel at all. So now here we are on Sunday. How bad was the damage and what have you had to do to deal with all of that?
The damage was enormous and widespread, with thousands of trees and debris and trampolines and roofs and all sorts of other things blown around the track. We've had enormous effort involving thousands of people to pick all of that up and to put the infrastructure back together. Today, we do expect most of the railway to be operational, but inevitably with the forecasts, it will be sadly disrupted again. I know that's very disappointing for our passengers, and I do urge them to check before they travel.
What about tomorrow morning, when everyone wants to get back to work? Do you think that there's still going to be disruptions, and should people also perhaps think again about travelling tomorrow?
We'll do our absolute best to keep the railway open tomorrow for our passengers. We know people rely on us enormously, but you're right that the forecast is poor again tomorrow, so my advice remains the same. Do check before you set out to make sure that your train will be running.
What about the backlog? Do you have the same kind of effect as, say, airline travel, when you have a whole day of people not travelling?
It's a little bit different, but we have exactly the same problem with displacement of trains and train crew, and that's a little bit of what we saw yesterday when we get them back into the right place to start up efficiently. And that's what was happening all of yesterday, today, and get us ready for tomorrow morning again.
Has it cost you a lot of money?
Well, it has cost a lot of money in common with lots of other providers of infrastructure in the country. But, you know, our focus is getting our railway open again for our passengers. We know passengers rely on us. It's really important that we get it open, running as smoothly as we possibly can, notwithstanding the very poor weather that continues to be forecast.
OK, Mr. Kelly, thanks a lot for talking to us. Now, some good news from Beijing. Great Britain have won their first gold medal of the Winter Olympics after the women's curling team beat Japan to take the top prize on the ice. Jackie joins me now for more. They did it. Fantastic,
Yay.
eh?
Finally, the best till last. Yes, they did. And it's the fourth time of asking for Eve Muirhead, and she was so emotional at the end. They beat Japan in the final. It was an annihilation, really, 10-3. Nothing like their semi-final tight match against the reigning Olympic champions, Sweden, which will go down in history as perhaps one of the greatest curling matches of all time. This was Team GB in control from start to finish. So Eve, Vicky Wright, Jen Dodds and Hayley Duff. And obviously, it's Eve's fourth Olympics, but it was the first Olympics for the other girls, and a tremendous achievement after a very, very long tournament. They started brilliantly, went straight into the lead in this match. They led 4-1 after 5 ends. They got a 4 in the 7th, and that pretty much all but killed it. I mean, Japan were chasing this match from the very beginning. They were very much the favourites going into it. Japan sneaked really into the semi-finals, having beaten the world champions, Switzerland. So GB, I guess, were expected to win this match, but they won it comprehensively. And we should point out, they were quite patchy throughout this Olympics, this team. It took a while for them to get going. I mean, they had 5 wins and 4 defeats. They only just got into the semi-finals, but they seemed to bring their best game right at the end. Brilliant in the semi-finals, even more brilliant in the final. And that is what a good team should do, right? You should build throughout the tournament and save your best to last. And that's what they did. They are the Olympic champions. Eve, of course, was the flag bearer at the start of the Olympics. It must seem a very long time ago for her. I mean, this is an incredibly long tournament, and I guess relief, incredible emotion at the end, because she was crying on the podium. I think you can almost see in that picture, she looks a little bit sort of teary. And I'm sure they're exhausted, absolutely emotionally and physically drained after that. But it was all worth it, because they've got the gold to match the silver that the guys won yesterday. So well done to Great Britain's curlers, and what a triumph for Scotland as well. I just want to say that.
Fantastic, Jackie. Thanks a lot. Well, let's have a look at some of this morning's other stories now. And police in Ottawa have dispersed the main portion of protesters blockading the Canadian Parliament over the government's pandemic restrictions. Dozens of arrests were made by police in riot gear who used pepper spray and stun grenades to clear the area. A passenger who was among the missing after a blaze on a ferry between Greece and Italy has been found to be alive. That's according to a Greek shipping ministry official. Rescue teams are searching for at least 11 people after the Euroferry Olympia vessel burst into flames on Friday night. 2 people were left injured after a helicopter crashed into the sea off Miami Beach. Oh. Video tweeted by Miami Beach police show the aircraft falling into the ocean meters away from a crowd of swimmers. Police say the 2 injured have been taken to hospital. They're in a stable condition. A 3rd passenger wasn't injured. The beach was closed and a federal investigation is underway. That's a lucky escape. See how that? Helicopters flip. Time now for the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So today's wind and rain may bring some disruption and hamper the clear-up after Storm Eunice. There will be outbreaks of rain to start the day, heavy in the north and west, but parts of southern England do look dry. It's going to be windy and mostly mild, but chilly in the far north. Heavy rain will become more organised across Ireland, Northern Ireland and Northern England during the morning. Elsewhere, southern Britain will stay cloudy with patchy rain extending into southern England. Meanwhile, Scotland can expect a mix of sunshine and blustery showers, some wintry on the hills, and it is going to stay mild for many. Hello again. Now, over the last 2 years, farmers have faced extreme weather conditions, poor harvests, supply chain shortages, and a global pandemic. That's taken not only a physical but also a mental toll. 92% of farmers under the age of 40 rank poor mental health as the biggest problem they face today. Sky's Emma Birchley reports.
3 years ago, Matt Stiles and his wife took the big step of starting their own farm in North Cambridgeshire from scratch. But juggling a full-time job employed as a farmer to guarantee a wage, whilst also caring for his own sheep, pigs and poultry, has taken its toll.
I've sort of been presented with these feelings of anxiety and worry and sleeplessness and, low moods and things, and kind of thought, well, why am I feeling like this? There's this sort of stigmatised, almost toxic trait within agriculture that you have to be tough. And, you live a tough, outdoorsy way of life. And, no one has bad days or bad feelings.
But it's a growing problem. It's thought more than 1/3 of farmers could be depressed. And it particularly affects those who are younger, like Matt, who's only 27. When asked, the majority of farmers, whatever their age, said poor mental health was a particular issue. But for those under 40, 9 out of every 10 said it was the biggest hidden problem they face. The research has been carried out by the Farm Safety Foundation. Its campaign, Mind Your Head, aims to encourage those who are suffering to seek help.
We want to normalise conversations about mental well-being. We want to talk about it the same way we talk about going over in our ankle or having an injury in a 5-a-side football match. We all have mental health, good and bad.
Yeah, I've just got a stench.
Former Emmerdale star Kelvin Fletcher bought his own farm in the Peak District last year and has seen firsthand just how tough it can be.
It's a massive responsibility. It's a sector that is vital to society. British farmers produce the food for our plates to the best standards in the world, and that kind of hard work tends to sometimes come at a price.
It's not unusual for Matt to work 15 hours a day, and switching off at bedtime can be a battle. He's found online therapy, and reaching out to other farmers has helped him cope. The dream is to eventually become his own boss full-time. He knows to achieve that is as much about managing his head as his business. Emma Birchley, Sky News, Cambridgeshire.
Let's go back to our top story now, and the Prime Minister is expected to lay out his plan to end all COVID restrictions in England to MPs when they return to Parliament this week, including ending self-isolation after a positive test. Let's speak to Dr. Raghib Ali. He's a Senior Clinical Research Associate at Cambridge University. Dr. Ali, thanks a lot for talking to us. So what do you make of this? Is it a good idea?
Good morning. I think the first thing to look at is the current COVID situation in England, which fortunately, on all metrics now, things are clearly improving. Hospitalizations and deaths have been falling for some time. Even on the ONS survey that we get on a weekly basis, it's clear that infections are falling now as well. So our very high levels of population immunity, as well as the care that everyone's been taken, personal responsibility and voluntary behavior change has really kept this wave much lower than we had feared. So I think going forward, we would expect people to continue to maintain that, a certain level of caution in their behavior. We've already seen that even after the mandate for face masks was lifted, most people are still wearing face masks. Even though there were no restrictions on contacts over the last few months, people have still kept their level of contacts low. And so I think going forward, even if the legal requirement for people to stop self-isolating is not there, it's likely that the vast majority of people will continue to do that because, of course, most people don't want to infect other people. If they have symptoms which are consistent with COVID or indeed any respiratory illness, I think the guidance should be very clear to make, so that people know that they shouldn't go to work. They certainly shouldn't be traveling on public transport or meeting people who are at high risk. And as long as people continue to follow that guidance, I think it's reasonable to lift that legal requirement.
There is, however, the argument of people, vulnerable people, those who suffered from long COVID, who say it is a serious disease and we're not taking it seriously enough.
Of course, we need to have at the forefront of our minds the needs of those who are at higher risk from COVID. So many of my patients are at high risk either because of their age or because of having impaired immune systems. And of course, that's why, as I said, the care that everyone has been taking, people should continue to do that as they have been over the last few months. For the vulnerable people, I would also encourage them, and maybe this message hasn't got across as clearly as it should, wearing a good quality FFP2 or 3 mask does provide good protection to the wearer. That's the kind of masks that we wear in hospital now as frontline doctors. So although we're daily, having seen COVID patients coughing on us, most of us are wearing those good quality masks, haven't caught COVID. So they do provide good protection. So even if other people are not wearing masks, the person who's at risk themselves, if you wear a well-fitted, good quality mask, you are well protected from COVID. So that's an important message I think that needs to get out there because it is essential, as you say, to be responsible and to use those freedoms responsibly.
What are those masks called again, Dr. Ali?
FFP2 or FFP3 masks, also called N95 or KN95 masks. So they provide a better fit. They go over both the nose and the mouth. They don't have a gap at the edges. They're the kind that we wear in hospitals, but they are available, and I've bought them myself online for the general public as well.
Okay, now, you said this wave now, but do you think we could see another variant that is more deadly than Omicron coming from a country which doesn't have high vaccination rates? Do you think we should be concerned going forward?
So we certainly need to be not complacent. We're currently in a good position. Omicron, unfortunately, has been less severe than previous variants. Our population immunity is likely to be the highest it's ever been. We should continue to ensure that people that haven't had the vaccine yet come forward and are offered the vaccine, particularly those who haven't had a first or second dose at all, but even those that haven't had the booster, it's never too late. Of course, new variants could come, and there's no guarantee that the new variant, when it comes, because they will come, it's certain there will be new variants. There's no guarantee it will be it will be milder than Omicron, or they won't be as severe as previous variants. And that's why I would advise that we should continue our monitoring, certainly. We should continue to sequence on a sample of COVID infections to see whether new variants are coming in. I would also recommend ongoing surveillance with the ONS infection survey, so that we have a good idea of what the prevalence of infection is in the country and in different parts of the country and in different age groups. So that level of surveillance is going to be important, so we're best prepared as possible for when the next variant arrives.
Okay. Dr. Ali, thank you so much for talking to us. Have a nice Sunday.
Thank you.
Let's have a look through the morning papers now. And joining me is the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, and journalist and broadcaster Badisha. There they are, Dawn and Badisha. Thanks a lot for hanging around. Badisha, why don't you start? The Telegraph, what are NHS trusts going to be paid for?
Right. Well, we know that NHS trusts are going to receive funding from the government, but they also receive a sort of extra top up, which is related to elective surgery. Now, we've all lived through what we've lived through over the last 2 years, and we know that when it comes to surgery, there have been delays in necessary treatment, necessary operations, ongoing treatment for long-standing conditions and cancer treatments. And now the government are really trying to say, okay, let's get this system back on its feet. But what they're doing seems quite strange to me, which is that they're offering a sort of top up based on performance. And they're saying to NHS Trust, well, the more efficient you are, the more patients you can get in and out of the door, we're going to give you more funding based on that. And if you don't manage to do that, so if you don't prove your results and your effectiveness, well, why should we pay you any incentives? And that to me seems quite cruel, because the entire nation is on the side of the NHS, and the problem isn't inefficiency or slowness, it's underfunding. It's underfunding at the source. And so I really don't like to see the government talking about, oh, we're going to incentivize you for your performance, because as far as I'm concerned, the NHS's performance has always been exceptional. We're talking about quality of care and quality of expertise. What it needs is money at the root and the branch, the infrastructure, the payment, the salaries, the support for NHS workers. The government are saying, well, actually, what the people want to see is, they're paying increased taxes, they're paying increased national insurance. They want to know that they get the services back again. But I think that sets up an unnecessary enmity and cynicism between ordinary people and the NHS. I don't think the NHS needs to be incentivized like that. It needs funding at the source.
Sunday Express, sort of on the same thing, the end of the pandemic, really, or is it? Dawn, what is Boris Johnson set to announce?
Right, okay. Well, this in theory is good news. I think it's good news personally. Defiant Boris will act all COVID rules. It's Freedom Day again. You do have a slight feeling of déjà vu that we have been here before. There's a cabinet meeting tomorrow on Monday where Boris is going to announce all COVID rules are going to go, and that will apply as of February the 24th, which is Thursday. So all happening very fast now, and this is going to end a legal duty on people to self-isolate if they test positive. Now, the BMA have naturally said this is too much, too early, and we shouldn't be doing this. And there are obviously accusations that this is the dead cat or the dead dog or whatever dead thing it is that this week been flung on the table to distract us all from Boris's other problems, shall we say. To be honest with you, Kimberly, I'm not entirely sure I care about the reasoning of it. I'm just glad that we are, with the amazing vaccination rollout, coming through the pandemic. Omicron, as your doctor has been saying earlier, is a weaker virus. We do have to learn to live with it. And I think, most medics will agree with that. Interestingly, though, Kimberly, 50% of people do say that even though all restrictions are being removed, and this is obviously just in England, that they will continue to self-isolate and to keep social distancing. And many of them will be wearing masks in public. And this applies even more to those who do feel particularly vulnerable and aren't more at risk. But, it's in theory, it's good news. And obviously the other part of all this, the big debate is whether free testing is going to come to an end. Now, the thing is, Kimberly, it's not free, is it? Because it's the NHS paying for it, and it's costing us millions of pounds to just hand out the tests. So there's a big debate to be had about whether testing is going to be so important as we move forward on this one.
It does feel like it is such a huge moment for everyone, does it? And as you said, it's just in England. Badisha, what do you think? Do you think people are actually going to continue to self-isolate, even if they're not legally bound to do so? And do you think they're going to be wearing their masks and keeping their distance?
By and large, I think they are. It's very easy to get angry at the 10 or 20% of people you see on the tube who are not doing that or who are coughing all over people. But it's always been the case that if you have any kind of illness, even just a cough or a cold, you stay at home. Partly because just staying at home makes you feel better, but partly out of consideration for other people. You wouldn't go into the office with a stinking cold because you know it's contagious. So I do think that people do have a certain degree of common sense. And I've been really heartened to see that even though masks aren't mandatory everywhere, generally speaking, there is quite high compliance. And I've actually bought a range in various colors because they tone with my planned spring and summer outfits. So I have vanity reasons because I look absolutely snappy in a mask. So I have lots and lots of reasons to wear it. And I also haven't had a cold in 2 and a bit years.
Yeah, they're quite a fashion item now, aren't they? It's fun, isn't it? But anyway, talking of fun, let's lighten things up. What is Jacob Rees-Mogg saying about cream eggs, Dawn?
Oh, I love this story. We've got to have some fun. It's a Sunday morning. Right, okay, this is page 12 of the Sun. It's only a tiny story. Top Tory, obviously, Jacob Rees-Mogg, says he's hooked on Cadbury's cream eggs. And this has been revealed because he only agreed to go on Have I Got News for You after bosses at the BBC One show sent him a box of Cadbury's cream eggs.
How many in a box? I'm just wondering the calorie.
Box.
That's a lot. I mean, I like cream eggs.
Don't go there. Don't. His default lunch in the run-up to Easter is a sandwich and a cream egg for pudding. And it would be Jacob Rees-Mogg who has pudding, wouldn't it? But his big worry this year, Kimberly, is that his nanny is finally going to retire. She's 80.
Oh, I'm let her retire. Oh, dear, man. If I ate a cream egg every day, that would be dire. Badisha, are you vomiting? You don't like cream eggs?
No,
what?
They're so disgusting.
What?
What's in them? It's so gross. They make me gag.
Okay, what about the caramel ones?
Oh, give me a break.
Right, let's talk about holidays. Oh, they're going to get more expensive. What is this in the mail, Badisha?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, once we've enjoyed Freedom Day, Freedom Spring, and Freedom Summer, we're going to have very expensive holidays. We've been talking about the fuel, the rise in the cost of fuel over the last several months. This is not some sort of new thing. But of course, airline companies who are suffering from all of that are going to pass the cost on to the customer. So everybody wants to know what this increase is going to be. I'll give you some benchmarks. If you and your 2 kids and your other half want to go to Disneyland this summer, ordinarily you'd pay around £950. You're going to be paying around £1,100. So it's a few £100 increase. That's if you book around about this spring for around about August. Now, all the signs are showing that because we're so weary of COVID, people are willing to take on board those few hundred extra pounds. In fact, the only people who don't want to pay the extra are those who are, oddly enough, wealthy enough to be taking several holidays a year. Now, that's not most people, is it? On the other hand, lots of airline experts are saying that companies are going to be very cautious because the recovery we're having from COVID is actually quite fragile. People are very aware that the cost of living has gone up for ordinary households, so they may scrimp and save on their holiday this year and see how it pans out in the long run.
It sounds like all we're going to be able to do is sit around in our fancy masks and eat cream eggs. We've got to leave it there. Maybe not for you, Badisha. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic Sunday, Badisha Dawn. Thank you.